Well, I missed yesterday's daily word. I apologize. I didn't get back here to the barn studio. But I had some thoughts in mind based upon yesterday's daily text. So I thought I would go ahead and comment on that. The text for Wednesday, January 15th. It's taken from Ephesians 4:1 and 2. Walk worthily of the calling with which you were called with all humility. And then it highlights David's humility and that he didn't lose control of himself and kill Shimei. Well, the story there was David had been driven off his throne by his own son, Adonijah, who staged this coup. First, he murdered David's other son, Amnon, because he raped his half-sister Tamar. And Shimei was a member of Saul's household, whom Jehovah disposed of. But Shimei didn't accept David as the new king. So when David was forced from his palace, Shimei was walking alongside David and his retreating entourage, cursing them and throwing stones at them. And of course, Abishai was David's warrior. He said, "Let me go up and take this dog's head off." And David said, "No, my own son is against me. Maybe Jehovah will intervene." Well, it points out that David wrote the third psalm while he was fleeing from Adonijah. There's a lot in that story, the life of David. And he wrote many of the psalms based upon his experiences in life, the third psalm being merely one. David was persecuted, of course, by King Saul. He was a fugitive in his own land. And then after he consolidated his kingship, here his son tried to have him murdered. So many of the Psalms that David wrote are really what we would call messianic Psalms. In other words, the experiences that David had in real life under inspiration, he was speaking as if he were Christ, undergoing those hardships. The one thing that Christ did not have in common with David was that Jesus was perfect. Whereas David, he made a few mistakes in life, a few very big mistakes. Foremost was his adultery with Bathsheba, and then to cover up the fact that she was pregnant, he had her husband murdered, killed in battle, and then David married her to prevent her from being put to death as an adulterer. And he thought he had it all covered over, and then Nathan came, and you likely know the story there. He let him know that Jehovah saw everything. And because God had made a covenant with David, God did not put David to death. But David paid the price. Jehovah said a sword would not depart from his house, and that his own wives would be violated for all to see, which is what Adonijah did. He took some of David's concubines and pitched a tent up on the palace roof, and so that was a way of showing that he had taken his father's throne. And of course, the sword was that when he had Amnon put to death and tried to have his own father put out of the picture. But Jehovah wouldn't hear of it, and Absalom I said Adonijah before Absalom was killed. You know, the Watchtower, they they have a new way of understanding the scriptures. They're getting rid of the old way of type and anti-type and all of that, unless there's clear evidence that it serves as a type. But David's life, and this instance with his son trying to kill him, and Shimei, it is pointing forward to the persecution of Christ's brothers. Now, Jesus is no longer in the flesh. He cannot be persecuted, but what is done to the least of these, his brothers, is done to him, especially after they are sealed and approved for the kingdom, which I've spoken about on many occasions. And it's interesting that Jesus warned his followers of this very thing. You know, Jehovah's Witnesses have been persecuted. There's no question about that. Some countries, it's totally illegal to practice your faith as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, like, for instance, in Russia. And of course, well, many Islamic countries and communist countries like China. And Jehovah's Witnesses have been persecuted within the realm of Christendom, for instance, back during the Second World War. But it's going to get a lot worse for Jehovah's Witnesses. And the persecution is going to come from within, from among family members, from among the congregation. Jesus warned when he was speaking about the conclusion of the system of things and talking about nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom. In the book of Mark, the 13th chapter, Jesus said that his followers would be hauled before local courts, beaten in the synagogues, and put on the stand before governors and kings. And then he said, furthermore, brother will deliver brother over to death, and a father a child, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all people on account of my name. Well, isn't that what Absalom tried to do? He was a child who rose up against his parent and tried to have him put to death. And Jehovah wouldn't allow it. But Jesus is going to allow it. It serves his purpose in two ways. Jesus elsewhere spoke of his servants being put to death, and he told them not to fear. Do not fear him that can kill the body and do nothing more. Fear him who can kill the soul, throw it into Gehenna. But Jesus said, every hair on your head is numbered. In other words, God knows you intimately, and he can protect you. Now, in the case of those who will be sealed at a future point, and they give this final witness, and they're persecuted and ultimately put to death, their death brings about an instantaneous change from flesh to spirit. So they don't really die. And that's what Jesus was essentially promising. Don't be afraid of those who kill the body and could do nothing more. So being faithful to death is a real reward, because again, once those are sealed, they're immortal, basically. Now, I've been intending to write some articles on David. I've done on Daniel. I've written a number of articles on my website, and there's a chapter in the book, but I thought I would consolidate them and try to put another brochure out there. In the third chapter of Daniel, that's where Nebuchadnezzar commands this gigantic obelisk or image to be created, and all the dignitaries throughout his realm were required to assemble themselves, and when they played the music, the national anthem, whatever, everyone would have to bow before Nebuchadnezzar's idol. And you know the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were standing all alone out there on the plains of Dura. Talk about sticking out like a sore thumb. And of course, they were hauled up before Nebuchadnezzar, and their accusers said, "These men have disobeyed the king." And he gave them another chance to bow down. And they said, "No, we're not going to do it. Whether God saves us or not, we know he can. If he doesn't, we just want it to be known that your gods are not the ones we're going to worship." And so Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and commanded the furnace to be heated up 7 times hotter than normal. And the men who were charged with binding and throwing the Hebrews into the fire, they were the ones that perished. The fire was so hot. Wow. A moment later, Nebuchadnezzar is looking in the furnace and he says, "Was it not 3 men that we threw into the fire? I am seeing them in the middle of the fire, and a 4th one who looks like a son of the gods." Well, you're probably aware that the entire theme of Daniel is the kingdom of God. And Jesus, the king of that kingdom, is portrayed in a number of ways. For example, in the 7th chapter, he's referred to as someone like a son of man, gaining access to the Ancient of Days. And then in the 8th chapter, he's called the Prince of Princes. And then in the chapter dealing with the king of the north and the south, he's portrayed as Michael, the great prince who is standing in behalf of the sons of your people, Daniel's people being the Hebrews. But of course, Daniel's people in a spiritual sense are anyone who worships Jehovah, so that applies in the Christian era. Anyway, who was the 4th man in the furnace? It looked like a son of a god. It was Michael, the great prince who was standing in behalf of Daniel's people. Well, Jehovah could have saved Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego without having a visible manifestation of someone like the son of a god. He did so because it's a portent. And it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar made this image immediately after he had the dream of the metallic image. And Daniel was inspired to explain this dream. He not only explained it, he told the king what he had dreamt, something is totally impossible for any human to do. But God revealed that to him, and he said, "You, O King Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold." And then he explained, there were other metals that represented other kingdoms that would follow him. And then God's kingdom, represented as the stone, would crush the image. So Nebuchadnezzar probably felt justified in erecting this image to his own majesty. because the dream he had is in the second chapter, and then you flip to the third chapter, and there's Nebuchadnezzar's building this 100 feet tall image. May have been a statue of himself. We're not told of any features on this, just that it was a golden image, and they had to worship it, and it represented the gods of Babylon. So it may have had engravings on it, which was very common in the architecture of the Babylonians. At any rate, I say it is a portent of when the holy ones do not receive the mark of the beast. They won't worship that tower, and they're put to death. Except, again, they can't die. Jesus said that during his presence, that those dead in Christ will rise first, but then the living will meet the Lord in the air, just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego met the Lord in the fiery crucible. They couldn't die. So, yeah, that thought was with me from yesterday's text. A week or so ago, I did a little video on the second coming of Christ, a brochure. And I ordered a box full, about 30 of them the other day. I plan to mail them out to various branches of the Watchtower and some to the headquarters and so forth. Some had asked me, well, where's the link? I put a link on that video, but it was down below in the information box. You had to click on See More. But if you go to my website at ewatchman.com, there's a big banner across the front, and it gives you the option of downloading a PDF or purchasing the paper from Lulu that they do print on demand. It's $4. I get $1 royalty to help finance my buying these crates of brochures to send out. So if you would like to share that information with someone, you can download the PDF for free, attach it to an email or something, share it with some of your contacts, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, or purchase a copy. The nice thing about Lulu, you can put in the address of the recipient and just have it mailed straight from Lulu. Although it does require a phone number. If you know their phone number, fine. Maybe give the Watchtower's phone number if you want to remain anonymous. But I'd like to see this information get out there because I believe that the second coming of Christ is in our immediate future. It will change everything. So that's about it for today. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.